Welcome. This is a virtual roundtable to discuss pressing questions facing the MSP community, hosted by Celerium. And for today's topic, we're going to be focused on network security. So as a quick intro, I'm Dan Blidner, Channel Account Executive here at Celerium. Again, very happy that you're able to carve out time in your busy schedules, join us for this presentation. Before we get into the actual Q&A, I want to just address a few quick housekeeping items. So we are recording this session, and we'll be following up with the link, so you will have that for your follow. You'll have that to review at your leisure. You'll also have a chance to register for our next session. It's our last for the year for these Q&A sessions. It will be in December. So at the end of this session, we can get you registered for that. And finally, there's also a quick opinion poll that we'd like to address at the end of the session. Just want to get your feedback, see how we're doing. So I do see some other members continuing to come in. I want to also introduce my counterpart, John Sauce Marinaro, Director of Technical Sales. John's actually going to be walking you through the majority of the presentation, walking through the questions and answers. But I will be here monitoring the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring the chat Discord. So please take it away, Sauce.
Oh, thanks, Dan. So let's get right on into it. Now, we have already received a few questions from MSPs through LinkedIn and a couple other channels. So we'll get that started off with that. Dan, I think you got it up on yours. What we got off from there?
Yeah, let's kick it off. So I think we're going to start, in terms of this broad discussion around network security. There is a pretty broad introductory question that was brought up in some of our LinkedIn discussions. So the question states, what are the current trends and emerging threats in the cybersecurity landscape, obviously pursuant to network security?
So that's a big one. First of all, network security is constantly changing. If you're here with us today, excellent. Glad to have you here. I'm going to be talking about what I've been seeing in the past couple weeks. If you're watching this and it's, I'd say, over a month or two old, I would go and do a cursory search because there's always new stuff coming on up. So the idea of what current trends and emerging threats are always changing. What we've been seeing a lot lately, though, is a lot of, I guess, a big change in the larger players. We've been seeing that ones that had been more lying in wait have been getting a bit more aggressive, a bit more active. This has been true with things like, say, state actors. The big attacks that have been going on against India lately have been traced to a number of Chinese organizations that were previously very much more lie in wait and how do I put it? They were more focused on espionage and gathering information than actually attacking systems. And so that's a big one that's going on there. On the MSP space, on the smaller side, we've been seeing a lot more of people going through and dealing with what we consider commoditized threats. Now, in today's threat landscape, it's incredibly, incredibly cheap to go through and spin up an instance to go through and start finding targets. And even worse, there are methodologies of going through and finding that where you can just buy lists of open targets that are out there and not even have to go to the dark web to go through and do it. So there's a lot of emerging threats that are coming on out that are, I would say that the security through obfuscation that we have enjoyed in the past, where if you're a small location and you don't really care about security that much, you got a firewall and you're fine. It's becoming less and less of a bit of security because you're so small that nobody cares about. The other big shift, of course, is artificial intelligence. We are seeing more and more attacks these days utilize this and in interesting and new ways. I would say the biggest piece that's going on out there are artificially intelligent attacks being built in systems like ChatGPT Not in the way that you think. You may look and see, there's a couple YouTube videos and TikToks out there about, someone asking ChatGPT to go through and create a vulnerability based on this known exploit, or find an exploit and then create a, way to, for me to actually go through and exploit that. That's definitely possible in the future, and something that we're and everybody's looking forward to as a way of protecting against. But what people are using AI for these days to go through an attack is to expand upon what we consider phishing and spear phishing activities, socially engineered attacks. And so what those you'll see as is, usually somebody reaching on out, and it could be a generalized phishing attack going and saying, hey, you should click on here to log on into this. And then there'll be basically a little click through, and you get to the page that you want, not realizing that the click through gathered information. It may have asked you to log into something before you actually got you to the right page, or it may have gone through and asked you for certain information about, everything from your day and your other, anybody you may work with, both, collaborators as well as companies, clients you may be working with, to spear phishing attacks, where they may be asking you specifically for something at the very end of business. You're there at 7 p.m., about to clock on out, and all of a sudden a request for a purchase order comes on in that is coming on in, but it seems like they're a bit frantic, and they go and reach out and ask, hey, can you just go through and file this for me? It looks like the customer updated this information. Just go and push it through. They really need this done now, not realizing that they adjusted the bank details on that, so that you're now giving money to some offshore account and it's gone. Those are popular, and you can search those on your own if you want for those specific for specific variants of that kind of stuff. But we're seeing AI being used to craft those messages. So instead of someone sitting there and having to hand type that out, we're seeing that actually being built out automatically by systems like ChatGPT.
That's impressive. And I think, within the MSP landscape, being able to understand, what type of threat landscape is out there, what is, what are we up against, as it were, and understanding, that threat landscape, and seeing what we're up against. It's also important to understand, the vulnerabilities that may exist, to the client side, or to, the MSP itself. I'm curious, there's another question that is a kind of part and parcel to this. There's a question about what industries or sectors are most targeted by cyber attacks. Now, I think, for one, this could also be somewhat opportunistic, where, if there is a more targeted industry, that would be a good target to try and serve from a cybersecurity perspective.
So I would, there's two big categories to this. There's first the customers that you may be trying to protect. Enterprises have and always will be attacked because they are whales. It's easy to go whale hunting if you find a way to go through and exploit that. And that's the big hacks that you hear about. But then we've been seeing, the ability to have that commoditizing of threats. We're seeing a lot smaller people being gone for it. When I talked about the security through obfuscation, you may have a a dentist office that's getting attacked nowadays because they have a bunch of health information that anybody going through and dropping ransomware on can go and hold, or just possibly delete if they wanted to. They may be accessing your payment information and trying to go through and extract money out of you that way. So there's a lot more smaller companies that you may support that are now being attacked. And I would actually ask, if any of those have compliancy requirements, then you definitely need to look into that, because if there's a reason why there's compliance involved, any personal identifiable information, including health information, legal information, payment information, then you should be thinking that, hey, we are vulnerable to attacks. There is definitely, we are on their radar. Now, and that gets us to the big thing is, and this is something that I've talked about a couple times. If you've seen me at conventions, it tends to be one of my popular speeches, is how are you protecting yourself? Because you think about your companies, you think about people that need to be protected. Does it ever, and even better, do you think about the integrations they may have? So, like, say, if they are dealing with personally identifiable information, Is the health record system that you're using secure? Is the payment processor you're using secure? Well, what about yourself? What about yourself as a member of the IT industry, as a member of, as an MSP providing security to them? What access do you have? Oftentimes you've got access to everything because you have to, because if anything breaks, you've got to be able to access. Well, how are you protecting that? One of the big breaches that just happened recently and was the LastPass breach that came on up. And that's been an issue right now because people liked to put their crypto wallet credentials inside there. And now, you've got all these threat actors going through and just draining those wallets, transferring the currency elsewhere. Okay, well, that was the easy money. That was literally the $20 that fell out of your wallet and dropped on the floor and somebody grabbed. What can they do now? If they have access, if they were able to grab passwords and logins and stuff like that, which, if I remember correctly, with the LastPass breach, there weren't that many that were actually lost in that one. But you have to now start thinking about what vulnerabilities you may have. Do you have access? When was the last time you changed your password to your, remote login abilities? Whether or not you're using anything from GoToMeeting to just remote desktop. Do you have what are your policies for keeping up on that? Do you have a policy on that? And that gets into, further, what methodologies are you actually going through and using to keep yourself protected on that? And that's just a, top tier. What I ask everybody to do is don't just think about the security of your customers, think about your security. Because if you're not secure, well, let me tell you, the worst thing that I've ever seen happen to an MSP is having to tell a customer that, hey, you got hacked because of us, not it wasn't prevented by us.
No, it makes a lot of sense considering, historically the heavy hitters of, healthcare, finance, energy, but with the sophistication of these attacks and the commoditization of it, it really is looking to new areas to target, and the third party community, I think is definitely something to be wary of. So these are great questions. We have a few more that were submitted. I think addressing this threat landscape and really being able to have visibility into what we're up against. In terms of vulnerability management, a question is posed around what vulnerability assessment tools and techniques are most effective in identifying potential weaknesses.
So I'm going to open this up with, and I hope none of you have been taken by this. There is no silver bullet. If some company comes to you and says, if you use our system, you will be protected from everything, and we cover everything, then please let me know. I'd love to identify that. And if they're true, I would love to use them because I've yet to find anything that actually does that. More likely than not, I've got a bridge to sell you. That said, test your systems. Vulnerability assessment tools are fantastic. Go through and, once again, in the purpose of identifying, what you need to patch, what you need to vet, what you need to clear on your client networks and inside your own, you should be using multiple different brands, and B, different tools to go through and understand that, hey, if your customer, once again, say has personally identifiable information, like we'll switch gears to, say, legal information. Are you, do they have their records up in the cloud, or do they have an on-premise server? Are you going through and doing pen testing against the main site to see if that server is accessible, if, people can go reach on in? Does the VPN that they're running have any kind of easily accessible login that, people may use? Are those logins, rotated? So, I know people hate to have their password changed every other month, but they got to do it, stuff like that. And those are simple vulnerabilities that, assessment tools that aren't even, things that you have to buy. That's just things you have to think about. Do pen testing, go through and find out, what other things, other means of going through and protecting your networks are. We here at Celerium have a product with our Celerium Defense Network, with our Network Defender and such, where we go through and prevent connections coming on into networks, and we go through and alert whenever bad actors try to reach on in from IPs, or if you reach out to bad IPs on that. That's an example of a tool kind of doing double duty, where our first and foremost purpose is to go through and block those connections. But we're effectively doing vulnerability assessments constantly on that. Use tools like that. Don't just rely on your firewall to go through and do that, but make sure that if you have a firewall, you're using as much of your technology that you're paying for already. A great example of this is if most Meraki customers have a subscription to the Talos suite. Are you using that to go through and check your email and stuff like that? People on Sophos have a phenomenal IPS IDS. Are you utilizing that to go through your stuff, or do you have it turned off because it's slowing down traffic? These are the decisions you have to go through and make, and you have to go through and check. But once again, there is no silver bullet. If somebody says that they've got everything, they don't. Test your systems. And even better, if you've got systems that you can use to test the ones that you're testing, that's what you should be doing as an MSP. That, you need to be going through and understanding that, hey, our own servers, our own testing platforms can get breached. The Kaseya breach was a great example of that. Understand that and be ready to patch when you can. And in certain cases, alert your customers and shut down applications if you can't. Always have that built on into your contracts, into your incident response plan.
Yeah, no, I think, this is a great topic of discussion because, when we're out in the field, when we're out in the markets trying to secure an infrastructure, an organization ourselves, understanding the threats and what we're up against, understanding the vulnerabilities and where we may have gaps to fill. But whenever addressing this security, this vulnerability assessment, this risk management equation, it is an evolving process, as Jonathan noted, and this layered approach, or defense in depth, I think is critical. So very good. Now, interesting enough, this did come up in the answer you just gave, but I wanted to pull this question to this topic. What is the importance of applying security patches and updates to their systems?
Oh, that's always a good one. So I've done asset management, threat management, systems admin, and that kind of stuff myself. Oftentimes you'll have people be screaming, why don't you have the absolute latest patch? Why don't you have the newest things? Oftentimes your IT admin will not go through and keep you at the latest update because they have not gone through and vetted that that patch doesn't have any possible vulnerabilities itself or any compatibility issues itself. So understanding that a patch, you may not be on the latest patch, even if it may not be the latest stable patch, because your IT manager's unsure if you may have an archaic server system that you can't get off of because it's got a whole bunch of information on it that you can't migrate quite yet, and so therefore the server may not be patched up to latest level. You can put stuff in front of that to protect it, even if it isn't patched. That said, if you can, if the patch is out there and if there's nothing holding you back outside of you not getting to it, get to it. Do it. Please patch your systems. The amount of vulnerabilities that are easily patchable is crazy. There was that big Microsoft breach that happened I want to say a couple months back. And I'll have to look this up and get the information on that, but it was something that they had already released the patch for. It was already out, but people hadn't done it because it was something that hadn't been exploited. People hadn't found. I will have to look that on up and get better information on that. But I remember it being specifically something that Microsoft was just like, just download it, just patch it, and you are fine.
Yeah.
And people hadn't. Now, that said, if you do have systems that you can't patch, that you're holding back on because there may be a process, once again, outdated server, etc., a great example of this, if you want to know people not going through and updating their tools, I believe the McLaren F1 required using a compact laptop for over a decade to go through and access its engine diagnostics because they never upgraded that. So like, there are reasons why you cannot go through and do that. So go through and check out things like web application firewalls, which will go through and sit in front of your devices and prevent connections and prevent access over, especially if you got a publicly facing server. Go through and understand that there will be other technologies that you can go and put in front of that will limit the connection on and possibly give a better means of going through and accessing that. Zero trust policies, especially if you got a network built out to understand that and dealing with that, where the concept of zero trust means that things are getting constantly vetted. There is no trust but verify. There is always verify on this, and you can set up systems so that the server may not be air gapped, so it may not be completely perfectly protected, but you can put enough security in the way that people cannot get through unless they get on into that. And once again, please, if you can, patch and update.
Very good. Very good. So, we're talking about this vulnerability assessment, vulnerability management. There's another question that was posed around the IOCs, the indicators of compromise. So essentially, what are the common signs or IOCs that clients should be aware of? And there's a bit of a follow-up here. Can we provide some real-world examples?
Oh, well, once again, things are constantly changing. Always keep up on this, see what's new that's out there. There's a couple different categories of IOCs. Because this is a network conversation, I'm going to start with the network ones, and there's four big ones that you need to deal with. The first and foremost, I know I kind of hinted at this earlier when I said that you can buy, lists of this, is scanners. Now, when the internet was created and all these amazing, gigantic lines of communication between the, different government sites at the time were made, we would have to go through and, the protocols were designed to be able to fail between them if something was cut. So, in the case back then, if something got nuked, you can easily reroute the communications around that now crater. That's the idea that the internet's built on. And so we go through and we bounce our communication through millions of different points to go through and deliver this talk today. That's amazing. That's why the internet works so well. To make that function and to understand, hey, okay, can I reach this other thing? There are things called scanners out there, and there are organizations that constantly scan the internet. You may know them as Shodan, the Shadow Server Foundation. There's a number of organizations out there that go through and just constantly scan. Web crawlers crawl for information, and that gets often blocked these days because people don't want to go through and show that off. We have a love-hate relationship because we understand that it is a needed aspect behind that, but you've got that whole concept of security through obfuscation. It doesn't matter how nice the guy is that walks on up and goes, hey neighbor, I just want to check and make sure that if you have any doors or windows that are open, awesome, we'll show you that list if you want after we're done, great. If he then goes through and sells it to whoever buys, because what if you don't have the time? First of all, oftentimes they don't notify you when you are being scanned, and they're scanning constantly. And so if they find that kind of stuff, they may not notify you that they found something. They may ask you to go buy the list. And there are people that are buying that list that find out that, oh, hey, your side garage door is unlocked. AKA maybe you've got an open RDP port or open, even worse, SSH into your network. And that while they themselves are not exploiting it, they're not opening that door, they may sell that information off. That's why scanners can be problematic. And that's why they're number one on the list of four. With that in mind, though, we as Celerium go through and we block that kind of stuff. Getting into the other three, this is when we're starting to get into proper malicious activity. You've got malware right off the bat. That's anytime somebody's put something into your network that has gone through and done something bad, either exploited things inside your network, tried to exfiltrate data through data espionage, or just trying to wreak havoc inside your network. Malware can take a number of different forms, but it is all bad. It's the mal and malware. That gets worse when you get into the other two. The second is the honeypot designator, or the indicator compromise, which means that it's stuff that is specifically trying to attack on and that has been caught in someone's honeypot. For those that don't know, a honeypot is usually a part of the network, maybe on your firewall, maybe off of your firewall, that is designed to catch the flies. That's the honeypot. And so people attacking on in may get stuck inside that. It may host some fake systems to allow them to go through and do that, so you can understand the kind of people trying to connect to. You'll see that if you do use web application firewalls, they almost always come with one built on in, that kind of thing. And there are malicious ways of using honeypots, but we tend to use the white hat version of that, which is your people have caught flies in their honeypot effectively. And last but not least, C2 servers, your command and control servers. That means that you don't just have malware. You don't just have something that may have gotten caught in your honeypot. This is something that is now communicating out to a IP with a malicious endpoint there, a malicious server that is now trying to either transmit data back on into, say, encryption keys to encrypt all of your data via ransomware. It may be trying to exfiltrate data too. And so once you get beyond the scanner, you start allowing these to stack on up. And that said, it doesn't tend to go 1, 2, 3, 4 all the time. We've seen stuff go immediately from your scanners to your C2 servers, because, hey, we've been scanned, and then all of a sudden this C2 server just pops on up and is trying to, maybe they're trying to implement malware onto your device, that kind of thing. So it's really easy to see those bounce in between those, but oftentimes it always starts with a scanner, because they need to know what door to kind of get on in there.
Very good, very good. And I think we actually have a question that just came up with regard to the upcoming SEC cybersecurity regulations. So if we do have to maybe take some of this offline, we certainly can. But the question poses, how do you advise clients on what they need to comply with the upcoming SEC cybersecurity regulation?
So with SEC cybersecurity regulations, first and foremost, I don't have the exact regulations up in front of me, but I do know, because I did look into them before, that a lot of it can be dealt with by looking into certain compliances that are already out there for governmental bodies. CMMC is a big one. If you want to go for the big international one, ISO 27001 and 27701, I think, is the specific cybersecurity regulation on that. If you're compliant on those, talk to whoever's managing that. If you have your own internal CISO, if you have a vCISO, or if you work with that, they will know what's going on there and be able to start mapping that on out to those SEC cybersecurity regulations. Oftentimes, when it comes to these regulations, they are big on not just you keeping data and information secure, which you see with a lot of PII-based regulations, things like PCI or HIPAA and things like that. I believe with the SEC one, they also have requirements for reporting for whenever things come on through that, hey, if you did get breached, you need to notify within a certain amount of time, and to go through, so that your investors know that that's going on. You may feel like you're compelled to take the maximum amount of time within that window to be able to go and respond. My recommendation, as someone who also has CISO'd for companies before and have worked through these kind of things, is that following what I consider the Tylenol scenario to admit and say we're working on the process, and to define that process and keep all of the stakeholders involved in it is the best way of handling things like this. If you look into the regulations themselves when it comes to reporting on that, you'll see that they're almost based on the concept of doing that. They don't want companies to go through and try to hide that, because that causes, and the reason why the SEC cares about this is they are worried that people are going to try to hide this, or worse, obfuscate that and say, hey, yeah, this happened, but it wasn't that big of a problem, and only release enough information to make the shareholders happy for the time being. The When I considered the Tylenol response, back in, I want to say, the late 80s or early 90s, someone had started tampering with Tylenol bottles, and the company, I can't remember which company owns the brand, went through and specifically went to the press, notified the people at large, and said that, hey, if there is any, please come and return your bottles for tamper resistant bottles, ones that will show you that, hey, if somebody has gone through and tampered with this. And because of that, their specific market share exploded, because people now had trust that, hey, something went wrong, and they went through and fixed it. That is the tactic you must take, because otherwise you're going to lose customer confidence in that kind of stuff. So if that's what you're asking, because there's a number of SEC cybersecurity regulations, but that's the number one thing that people have been talking about, is the report requirement. Otherwise, and I always recommend this, when it comes to your company and regulations or compliance, talk to who you work with on this. And once again, they may have compliance themselves already that they've filed that you can hop onto, or they may have already run this for you. But work this out with your CISO or whoever you have working on that side of things.
Yeah, and I think anyone that's been working with these compliance guidelines for the past 5, 10, 15 years, I think that there is a maturity that is slowly coming. With this new SEC guideline, to John's point, it really is around the reporting aspect. Doing some kind of research on the fly. It is also important to note that, because again, this is newer, it's a little bit less mature, that there is a kind of self-regulation also seemingly in the material, that the issuers must disclose cybersecurity incidents that are determined to be material by the company. So exactly as Jonathan had noted, there's a little bit of a potential for obfuscation here. So it is up to the client. But again, at SEC, at that level, we're talking about shareholder, we're talking about market share, and just as the example John made, these decisions can be made from company to company. From our perspective, not necessarily being a compliance organization, we do have training for CMMC. But we are, a cybersecurity organization. So, I think the rule of thumb is, if you are secure, you are likely compliant. But just because you're compliant, it doesn't mean you're secure. So that is actually an interesting component to our next question, because the question poses best practices around the time frame to respond to security incidents. As an MSP, what recommendation do we have in terms of best practice? This includes breaches and data leaks. What is the that threshold? It's a toughie.
Well, yeah, I mean, once again, I believe that you should make your stakeholders part of your part of the process, like I said before. It really does depend on what's going on there. If it's something that is directly affecting stuff and you need them to immediately act to prevent worse things happening, then of course you need to notify as soon as possible and get on that, jump on the grenade. Is a good turn of phrase for if there's a breach and you're needing to go deal with it. I've seen time and time again, the MSPs that people stick with and recommend for others are the ones that have had something happen and have shown that they have a process for dealing with that and for notifying their customers and understanding that this is not, they have told their customers wisely that attacks happen, and they are there to not just go through and prevent them from happening, but to also respond to and mitigate that when it does happen. And I mean, I've personally worked with MSPs that have said that, oh no, when you're with us, nothing will ever happen, that kind of thing. And then when the inevitable thing happens, well, then all trust is lost versus the one that goes, hey, here's all the processes, here's the technology that we're using to go through and do this. Once again, there's no silver bullet. Here's our plan. And you'll see that's a huge part of what those standards I was talking about, CMMC, ISO 27001 and stuff, of compliance, is that there are instant response plans for when something goes wrong. And that, for 27001, it's so big that it could be things like if there's a fire in the office or a plague or whatever. But when you get into cybersecurity events and having to deal with that, like, what is the process? And understand that you need to have that process ironed on out when something goes through so that you can follow it 1, 2, 3, 4. Because, and here's the thing, your customers can see you're following out 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're doing what you said you were doing, and this process is going through and either working or the process is evolving to work.
Yeah, I think it's important, setting realistic expectation, being transparent in the process, and from there, I think that's the best methodology. And going through these questions, I see we've been able to discuss the threat landscape and being able to understand what we're up against. We've talked about the assessment of our own vulnerabilities as well as client vulnerabilities, being able to determine what weaknesses we may have, what chinks in the armor may exist. And we've also talked about this requirement around reporting and being able to bring this information back to the client so that when there is an incident, again, we're setting those expectations, we're being transparent in this process. The next question goes into a different area that is very important in terms of any security, especially network security. Are there specific security training topics or scenarios that seem to be more effective in improving employee security awareness and behavior?
Yes, the weakest link, the physical element, your employees.
The human.
I have experience on this personally. My first tech job out of college was working for a small company, a couple you might have heard of, called Barracuda Networks. And got trained up on all of their different products, ended up becoming a sales engineer with them, and actually helped work as a evangelist and one on the integration team when they purchased Fishline, with phenomenal anti-phishing product. If you're looking for anti-phishing stuff, definitely check them on out, as well as Fish Me and all the other ones that are out there. So I've got a background on this because you need people are generally trusting because they don't understand how easy it is to be exploited. And that feels like an incredibly jaded and pessimistic way of living your life. But let me tell you, the amount of times where someone got hacked because they picked up a USB stick that was sitting inside, in a parking lot or something. It's a joke to this point. If you know anybody who's gone to, or if you've gone yourself to any of the big hacking conventions, your Black Hat or stuff like that. There's one up here in San Francisco that goes on that's a ton of fun as well, where they understand that all of the hacking can be done to try to exploit a technical vulnerability in a code. and that's all about finding a break in the logic, a chink in the armor that you said, Dan, and trying to go through and drill your way through it. Or or and this is one of my favorite things that was done. You can just put a USB stick. You can give away free USB sticks at a convention that have malware infected on them. Often you'll find that big companies, your Fortune 100s, will have a rule that when you go to a convention, if you do get swag that includes anything that can be plugged on in, cables, USB sticks, including thumb drives or anything like that, that if you're working for a more secure organization, you may need to actually go and put that through your IT department to have them go through and check that kind of stuff. You can't just plug that on into your device because that can get infected. That may be a great vulnerability point of it. And don't trust things that are just laying around the office either. There was a famous hack, and I'll have to pull up the information on this, where people just left USB sticks at someone's office that were, I think, even office branded. Don't quote me on that, but like they plugged it on into their systems, and there was, it had generic information on it, like some files and that kind of thing, not knowing that there was malware on that kind of stuff. Like there's really easy ways of getting around the technical ways that we protect people by just
Using a
dealing
human
with human
element.
curiosity.
Yep. Yep.
So how do you deal with that? Training topics and scenarios. There's, and I hate to bring this up because it's kind of painful, but and you can search this by just searching, oh, what are the keywords on it? I want to say, phishing attack bonus, and even Reddit and stuff like that, where a couple companies, and it's still going on, back in 2020, throughout COVID, and now constantly to now, offered bonuses to their employees. And in 2020, it was, of course, during COVID. And there's like, hey, we know time is hard. Just go through and click through on this and fill out your information, and we'll go through and send you, I think it was like an extra $200, something simple to help, get toilet paper and stuff like that. You help your family. Well, that was being done by their, I can't remember which one it was. Might have been No Before or something. Their anti-phishing company, to go through and test their people to see, hey, how many people actually went through and asked HR if this is actually something going on, or is this someone just grabbing our information? And it had incredible effect. And it got into the news because people complained because they said it was mean. Well, I'm sorry. The world is mean. Yeah, there's a great one. The Tribune bonus that went on. I think there was one for GoDaddy as well, where they hit their employees. And it's just it is mean because that's it's supposed to be. When we were testing it on out, one of my popular ways of going through and phishing somebody was I'd go and check and see if there was a pizza place that opened up, and I'd go and pop on a fake coupon with a QR code that would go and run you through a simple login to your email. And yeah, there you go. There's the GoDaddy one. And you'd just go and scan the QR code and go log into your email, and it would then push you through and make it look like your login got bounced. So you then go through and try it again, whatever, maybe you mistype your password, and you would then be signed up for their email list or that kind of thing. And I would gather all the information off of the actual pizza place's stuff because that's what they were trying to do, to gather, customers. But didn't realize that first login that failed just grabbed your credentials and popped you over to the real login page. I did that. And that was me when I was learning this stuff. Like that is simple, easy level stuff. Now, the trick to learning about this, the trick to training about this, is not to make everybody paranoid as heck. Because that, as we found when I was working on that side of things, as people found, that leads to fatigue. People start going, oh, whatever. I don't want to report this. I got other things to do. I don't want to have to deal with this, to go through and do all this kind of stuff, whatever. You want people to feel like they're part of the solution. You want people to go like, oh, that's weird. I wonder if that's actually true, and get that, work on that sense of curiosity, make them feel like it's, they are part of the answer rather than part of the problem. And you can do that through quality training. I know, I mean, I've gone through and I've written that, I've been through that. Once again, top phishing companies all have great training that is designed around that. Things like, Know Before, or, Fishline, all of them that are out there will deal with fatigue for this. So train your people on up, not just to go through and follow the processes or else, but to be part of the solution, to say like, hey, guess what? If you catch this stuff, there is, give them a carrot, not just a stick.
And there's actually a follow-up with regard to security awareness and that training effort. Is there best practices to determine how often staff should be addressing security training? Is there any type of recommendation in terms of that cadence?
Uh, huh. That's constantly changing. And I would go through and look at the current statistics on how often you need to be doing that, because I am now out of that space and don't know what the official term is now. Back then, this was a couple of years ago, we would have people getting constantly trained on up every quarter, but I'm not sure how that has changed now. I feel like I'm getting trained every week on that nowadays, but that's just how it feels when you're getting trained.
There's a baseline, what, I think, a kind of major effort once a quarter with, potentially one-off or, kind of pop quiz assignments as they were, every other month, depending. But again, I think in terms of recommendation, you as the MSP obviously can make an assessment. Not all team members are created equal in their cybersecurity awareness. So, there is a notion of being able to, target those that may need the extra assistance. I know that, we've done it here at Celerium where, if you are caught, on one of these types of phishing efforts, I have to admit I was one of them. Then because of that, you'll go through the extra training. So I think it's a great question. It's important to note. I don't know if we have the perfect answer, but at minimum, I think once a quarter would be a good baseline to work from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, once again, carrot and stick on that, make it something fun. If you have an SKO, if you're a large organization with that, make it part of that, and, make it a party where people try to trick each other. Like, people love games like that.
So I think we have time for we have a few more here, but I think we only have time for about one more question. It just depends on how the discussion goes. So again, going through from a threat analysis, vulnerability analysis, reporting requirement to a training element in terms of your staff. There's also this question around KPIs and really, what metrics and KPIs can be used to measure how effective your network security efforts are.
Oof. So that is tough. There have always been issues with trying to record how good your security is. A wall will stand until it falls, is the idea. Um, Talk to the companies that you work with regards to network security. You'll find that they will generally, all of them will have some form of reporting that you can then use and bring back to your customers. Use that to set your expectation with your customers, that, hey, we're going to be providing you with monthly reporting about what's going on. We at Celerium made what we like to call the catch-22 report, where we understand that most people in the space kind of have a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, where if you don't let anything through, if you are a steel box and you're totally great and your customers don't see anything, well, your customer's going to come to you the next month and go like, hey, so I didn't hear from you. Are you doing anything, or you're just sitting there taking my money? Oh, but what if you let something through? Oh, now they're breaking down the doors going, why am I paying you? And so it's those scenarios that suck. They suck. So we go through and we give reporting that shows, hey, since you spun up this, device, this connection to there, we've protected you from this amount of things. And then over the past month, we've protected you from this amount of things. And they're coming from this area and they're in this category and that kind of thing. So customers are able to look at this and go, yes, bars, charts, graphs, yes, and recycle. But that way they know that you are working. You may have a customer that wants to go through and understand this better, be a little bit more security conscious on that. Awesome. Maybe they're the kind of person that you can go through and get extra resources on. They may pay you a little extra more to, cover things like that. Cool. Great. Make that a talk point, but get that kind of stuff. And so many systems will have that baked on in, have that reporting built on into that. Talk with your representatives for those, especially if you're dealing on the endpoint side. I know I've got a couple friends that work over at what's the endpoint, Huntress, and they do great reports on that for the endpoint sides of things, stuff like that. So, talk with your representatives, see if you can get a list of the various email attacks that have come on in and gotten prevented. And actually, that's a good cheap way is go and just take a snapshot of all the stuff that's fallen into the quarantine of your email security service. And, maybe trim off what the messages is just in case for, PII bits, but be like, cool, see all this stuff? This is the stuff that we blocked this month. We did a good job. No, pat on the back.
I think, and it's important, when we're dealing with the KPIs and we're dealing with metrics, in this space, and not to, really just kind of beat a dead horse, but if you have visibility into what you're up against and you can be able to show your customer the threats that they faced, as well as highlighting where they are vulnerable from their environment, that is the best balance in terms of security, right? You have to see what you're up against and understanding your weakness. That assessment of both your threat and vulnerability will really be able to ensure security.
Absolutely. And once again, I cannot focus on this enough. Metrics and KPIs are a communication between you and your client, or you and your employee, or you and whoever you're talking to that has this. They are negotiable. They always are. And they are something that both parties should understand and operate by. So if you aren't making that part of your onboarding process, that, hey, this is the information I'm going to get to you. If you have problems with that, we'll talk about that. Please do that.
And, there's just one quick follow-up point to this. I think it's important to know, again, around the metrics and KPIs within this space. Would you say there's any trends or patterns in this data, right, that we would be able to identify for areas of improvement? I guess, kind of like the indicators of where we could focus our time.
So it's going to be kind of a meta answer to that, but it all depends on your network. Start measuring this, talk to your customers, see what they care about and that kind of thing, and measure that and see how it changes yourself. If you see that things are, if you're getting attacked from certain vectors, bring that on up. Go like, hey, cool. Our email security, like our anti-spam stuff, hasn't seen anything because people don't care about that. But all of a sudden, people are, trying to attack on this vector. Bring that up to them. Go like, hey, cool. We've been seeing new stuff. What was the first thing I said? Everything is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Everything is changing. The only constant is change. So are there trends and patterns in the data indicate area of improvement? Good. You want to bring that up and be like, hey, keep an eye out. We've noticed that. Oh, and even better, if you've got the ability to correlate data between them. One of the things that we do in our system is we like to show that, hey, you've got certain attacks coming on into this. You want to protect everything against that so that, what may be the very edge of the wave will now have the entire network protected against that. That's the kind of stuff you need on there. And that it is incredible. There are very few ways you can be proactive about your entire network security. But that doesn't mean that you can be proactive on the ones that haven't been hit by being very reactive on the things that just got hit. So as soon as you see something hit on this side, get it through to the rest of it. And that way you're proactive on everything else.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's not one size fits all. Yeah, and that again, it's the key is visibility. So fantastic. I see we're just 5 minutes from the top of the hour, so I think that does wrap the Q&A portion for our presentation today. There are just a couple last little pieces I wanted to address, including if you would like to be added to that next session. That is scheduled again for noon Eastern on December 6th. Please feel free to give us a yes in the chat feature and we'll be able to get you added there. No registration will be required. Again, just yes in the chat feature for our session December 6th at 12 noon Eastern time. We will be focused on automation as our topic for that session. Also, if you'd like to speak more, we're going to include a link to my calendar. It's available at Celerium.com, but we'll get it into the chat as well. So please feel free, book time with me to continue the conversation. And lastly, I know that we did talk about having a quick opinion poll. Before you all leave, please insert on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. How would you rate this session today? We really do want to get your feedback, ensure that we're constantly improving our process as well. But with that, thank you, everyone. Again, really appreciate you taking time out. We do look forward to seeing you next month when we discuss automation. Again, December 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Learn more about the MSP Cyber Corner by visiting the link here and in the chat. But yeah, we'll see you next month. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
We'll see you next month, and I'm really looking forward to the automation chat. That should be a really good one because there's a lot
Should
of
be
cool stuff
interesting.
coming on up with that.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Take care, all.